question of the first one?
It has the readings from the first and then all the stuff that comes since then. Okay? Up until October.
Doing fine. How about you? Doing fine. Doing fine. Got your email.
Oh, did you?
Yeah, I got
okay,
it.
Great.
Yeah.
Yes,
I bet you know about it. Well, greetings. I'm going to have the opportunity to introduce Audri WilIiams. As you know, it's a name change since last year. And as you mentioned, we're going to get started now. We're sure people are going to be coming in. We're going to go ahead and get started. Audri, very dear close friend. We've only known each other now for 2 years. Seems like it's been about 200 lifetimes.
Yes, exactly.
And we met about 2 years ago at my house when she came down for a little retreat we actually had at the house 2 years ago. And Spirit has been working with her in unbelievable, awesome ways. Unbelievable, awesome ways. And you'll get a glimpse of that in a few minutes. As you know, she just got off the plane a couple hours ago coming in from D.C. And she'll, in addition to the work that she's presenting in this book, which is on sale, The Diary of Downtime Prophecy. She'll tell you more about it. She'll also be this Saturday doing a workshop an all afternoon from 12:30 to 5 where you can really get into a lot more of the meat of the information if you like.
When?
Saturday at 12:30 to 5 at the Dunbar Center on Wednesday. Yeah. Okay. And she also does sacred rock readings. The last time she was in town and did the sacred rock readings, she literally stayed over 3 extra days because so many people had signed up for it. We've already gotten 10 folks to sign up already. If you'd like a sacred rock reading, just see me right after the presentation or during the presentation. We have a schedule for the next 5 days that she'll be doing the readings. It's already starting to fill up, so if you'd like to do that, please do that. That's a donation for 50. They're very, 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 very profound readings. They last about an hour and a half. Extremely profound, extremely detailed. And I'm also representing the part of the group that brought her in. She'll be different places around Atlanta. Is the Institute for Divine Wisdom. And tonight, of course, we're doing in conjunction with Cultural Communications. And this is our little bi-monthly newsletter that comes out and gives schedules of the workshops and seminars we have. If any of you like this, I'd like to pass this out. But without going into more detail, it's my pleasure. I'm receiving of Spirit to be able to introduce Audri WilIiams.
Just some logistics, we only have about an hour, so I'm going to go very quickly through a lot of information. And as I start giving information, sometimes I will just kind of get caught up in it, and it could go a lot faster than what you may feel comfortable with. I will need you to let me know, because at that point I may or may not be really aware of what's happening in the group, okay? All right. There's some people here that were not here the last time, so what I'd like to do is do a quick review and then build on the information that we gave the last time and move on to some of the new information, which I'm real excited about, and share some experiences that I've had since I was here before. For those of you who were not here, or just to get us all on the same page, this process, this now time prophecy, you might ask, what is it about? What does it have to do with me? What's my experience in this whole process? Kurt mentioned that we came together at his house about 2 years ago. But what I like, and many things began to happen from that point on. Actually, they began a little bit before. When I was growing up, I always say that I was raised as much by spirit as I was by my physical parents. And when I say that, what I mean is there were always 4 elderly women who called themselves the grandmothers. And they really were with me all the time. And if I had something I needed to know, they would send somebody. And sometimes it might be other children, it might be adults. It could be many different things. The dolphins come quite a bit, but that's another story we'll talk about in a minute. So I was raised in both worlds. And one of the things that I hope the work that I do with Now Time affects, and I was sharing this with the brother, with Daryl a little earlier before we got started, is that it will help people to begin to understand that children are such open receptors. And when they come to us and speak about their experiences, we need to engage them in a serious conversation about what's going on with them. Encourage them to talk about their dreams in the morning, because they're receiving so much information, but our culture has no appreciation of the information that they bring forward. I think it was Malidoma Somé who said that, when the reason why grandparents and young children are so close is because one has one step leaving the world and the other one has just stepped into the world. So they have a lot more in common than we as adults may have with our own parents. Okay? So one of the things I hope to affect is that we begin to hear our children and begin to engage them so that they don't have to turn off from the experience that they're having, which for me started when I was 16 years old. And the way the grandmothers worked with me when I was a child allowed me to move through things at a very accelerated pace. So by the time I was 16, I was already a junior in college. And I remember saying I was already different because I was young, and I didn't want to be different anymore. I didn't want to be different. And so I asked the grandmothers, I was sitting out on the water one night, and I said, would you please take this away? Because I didn't know how to reconcile it in my life anymore. When you're little and you say certain things, it's cute. But when you start getting older and you say them, people have like a fear of you. They think something's wrong. Okay? And so I asked that it be taken away, and it was taken away. It was actually taken away for about 20 years, except there was a level of knowing that I was protected. I knew that I was protected. So that stayed with me. But in terms of the knowing and the information and so forth, it stopped. And then in 1993, I woke up one morning. At this point, I was the dean of the college. Again, I worked very hard building a career and pursuing that path. And so I was the dean of the college. I was going to work one morning, and just as though someone was sitting on the seat next to me, I heard this voice say, "Let go and go in faith, and everything will be all right." And I heard it with such a vibration that I knew it was real. I knew that it wasn't something I could ignore. So in listening to that voice, I went in and I spent the whole day contemplating what this would mean for my life on one level. And so I wrote a letter of resignation for, in the next 3 months and presented it. And it was interesting because when people said, well, what are you going to do? I didn't know, because it hadn't been revealed. But I knew that was the action. I also knew that had I not made that choice at that time, there would have been a part of me that would have died and never had returned. That would have just been gone. So that being done, my life from that point until about 3 years ago, everything in my life turned upside down. All the skills and knowledge that I had acquired that had always helped me propel myself career-wise and otherwise, nothing worked. And things began to fall away, one after another, financially, relationship, you name it. And finally, 3 years ago, I was at a point where I said, okay, I have to surrender because I don't know how to get out of this mess. And at that point, things changed because I let go. I stopped trying to be in control. And up to that point, I would always say, I move in spirit and so forth, but then I'd be so serious about making sure everything that needed to happen, happened, I thought. But what I learned in that process is that when you say you surrender, that means you have to let go of the consequences. You can't worry about what the outcome is going to be. You just have to release to it. So in the middle of the absolute most chaos that I could imagine anyone going through in terms of my marriage falling apart, in terms of filing bankruptcy, all of these things, I was in it. And that's when I began to hear. I learned to hear and to then take the action based on that hearing. So this symbol was the very first symbol that came to me. And what happened, I was asleep, and I was at a friend's house, and he was a South African healer. He had just left that day. And we were just sort of sitting around talking about Elias because we really enjoyed. His mother, some of you may know, she's a famous Indabelli artist, Esther Mahungalu. And if you've ever seen the Indabelli artwork around, there's an exhibit here in Atlanta I just saw, and she's one of the featured artists from the Indabelli tribe in South Africa. But anyway, her son Elias and I developed quite a relationship, and he was teaching me about the bones and some of the traditions and telling me about his experience growing up as a healer. So he was gone, and I felt this intense energy in the living room where a lot of her artwork was and where we used to spend a lot of time. And so I went in there, and everybody else stayed in the living room. And when I lay down on the floor, I felt myself drop through. It felt like I was dropping through the core of the earth. And when I did, and landed in this cave, what appeared to be a cave, he was there with the bones. And as he started to shake the bones and was getting ready to throw them, these spears of light came around him. And so it was like we couldn't connect. And he went into this intense trance dance. And when he did, and then threw the bones on me, the spears just went everywhere. And so from that point on, I ended up, long story short, at the bottom of the ocean, climbed up these steps and ended up on a boulder. And when I looked around to see where I was suspended in the middle of the universe. And the moon was coming towards me, and in the moon was a woman. And she was very angry with me. And what she was saying is that uncertainty has to cease. And this is important to remember for the age that we're in. We can no longer move in the energy of uncertainty. And when you have received a calling and you know it, you've got to move. You've got to take the action. That's what time it is now. And so uncertainty won't serve you. So the point of these were, and I received the symbol before I had this vision. So for 2 weeks I was trying to figure out what the symbol meant. And what she kept saying to me over and over again was lightning charges, but it also destroys. And when you're moving in the energy of uncertainty, you have no control over what the ultimate outcome of your energy is. You're out of balance. You're not living your truth, and therefore you can short-circuit things just as well as create things, but you don't have any control over that energy. So that was the very first symbol. Now, the other, in Now Time Prophecies, it's a parallel story. It's a story about energetically what's happening to the planet. It's also a story about what's happening to us. And so the very first drawing that I was instructed to do had to do with reorienting to myself to what I thought the world looked like, in the sense that we typically think of North as being the top of the world. Well, in Now Time, the very first lesson I had was I had to understand that the East is actually the top of the world. And I understand since then, if you were to look at a true drawing of the world, what you would find is over the East there is a bulge. It's like a little bulge in the planet. And so I had to think of the East as being the top of the world. I was given this latitude and longitude. And when I looked it up on a map, it was in an area near Lake Nasser along the Nile. So the other thing that I had to adjust to is that according to when the information began to flow through me, there had already been a polar shift of about 10 degrees or so. Okay? And so I had to then realize that the poles were already beginning to shift, and so that true East had to be shifted up, and then I could think of that as the top of the world. These points that you see, 1 through 6, became the base points for all of the drawings for Now Time, even into this, even the ones coming forward now. And this base 6 has to do with, if you know, the core of the Earth. I mentioned that this is an area near Lake Nasser where we can experience what is happening at the core of the Earth. Is at an area in Peru where Peru and the Amazon River come together. I have not been there. I'm hoping to be able to go there soon. It's an area where there have been pyramids discovered, but the jungle grows so rapidly, they haven't been, every time they try to go in and excavate, they'll chop the stuff, the plant life off, and then within, before they can even get back out there the next morning to continue, it's already grown back up over it. So it's kind of an unknown kind of piece right now in terms of the bigger puzzle. But that's the area that's considered the core. North and south, we still have that orientation, but again, think of north and south as you would have thought about east and west. And then when you think of the west, there really isn't a reference point in now time for the west. It's more almost as though, if you consider this to be the head out here, it's as though when you get to the western region, these are the feet. So instead of having a stance like this, it's more like this. This becomes very important as you go through and get more and more information, especially the new information, because it's as though the planet is getting ready to ascend. Now, as we think of this in terms of the planet, we can also think of it in terms of our own physiology. All right? And I'll show you what I mean by that. In the now time information, there is reference to the 12-pointed hawk within. And again, think of this as being east, this being the western points or the launching point. And these numbers here represent the 12 points on the human body that are going through an awakening process. And as each one of these points awaken, we physically experience different things. And let me stop here for 1 minute just to talk about, hi, how are you? Good. Talk about that. First of all, in our journey, particularly when we're looking at spiritual enlightenment and issues related to spiritual enlightenment, most of the information that we get has to do with the crown chakra. The crown chakra is the point where we work to evolve and to allow us to ascend. We feel that this is the crown. This is where we will ascend to. Hi, how are you? Good. Welcome our elder member here, Audri. Thank you so much for being with us.
Thank you.
In now time, what the reference is where we have our most trouble, where we are in most conflict in this planet at this time is really at the second level chakra. So you can't get to here till you've done the stuff from here. Right. All right? And right here is where the masculine and feminine issues reside. And it's very important to bring that into balance, because if we don't, we can't clear that passageway. And each passageway, each in its own time, in its own place, in its own way, has to be cleared to allow a straight channel for the energy. Or for our bodies, human bodies, then to become conduits for the energy that's coming into the earth. And let me just say something about that. In terms of the energy coming into the earth at this time, I'm going to come back to that slide, but I wanted to put this on here so that you understand why that is so significant. On December 21st, now I will say that this drawing was the third drawing that I did, and it was probably back in maybe November, December of last year. And I didn't have any understanding of it until December of this year. And what this represents is from December 1st to the 21st, I was told to go on to go into isolation in the mountains of West Virginia. And I didn't know why, except once I was there, this became very clear. This is a 7-point alignment that has occurred in the heaven. This 7-point alignment, there's 7 points of light. These right here represents the Sirius star system, and there is a alignment or a pathway between Sirius and Pleiades star system, also combining some of the stars and planet of our own system and moons. So that what you have then, these 7 points are filled with light at such a level that we haven't known on this planet for 312,000 years. So just imagine that. And so this all came into alignment on December 21st. And actually we had our first movement, our first moon, the new moon on December 18th, where the moon actually moved into the energy, but we did not feel the energy here until the 21st of December. Now, on the 21st of December, a ray of light so strong was emitted into the planet. And this ray is going to be with us for a while. And I don't know how many of you all have been kind of tracking your own lives over the last month. There have been a lot of what they call in the readings now energy spikes. And those are nothing compared to this surge that we're supposed to get around the middle of February, and it's going to last until the second week in March. It's going to be a tremendous, they're calling this a wave. You know, a spike kind of comes and then it's gone, like that. But a wave, just imagine a surfer gets the big wave, and the only way that you can really navigate this wave is to try to get on top, and then you can just zoom through it. So I'm saying that just to plant that seed, and we can do some questions and answers around that. The important piece that I wanted to make point here in relationship to the other drawing is that this energy is so strong and so accelerated that if we don't do the work internally, it can create some very bad side effects, both from a psychological standpoint as well as from a physical standpoint, because it's so much energy coming in. If we're not, and it's vibrating and resonating in us, regardless of where we are in the path. But if we come into wholeness, as we work to do the work to heal ourselves and open those channels, we can literally manifest things that we never thought possible in very short periods of time. So while it's the most incredible time to be alive, it's also saying to us, be on point. You know? Let go of uncertainty. It does not work anymore. Even when you're not sure, move in the energy of certainty. Just keep going. Just keep showing up. All right? So when we're not as channels, as open conduits, as I spoke about earlier, what happens is the energy coming in previously was nothing compared to what we have now. But because we haven't done the healing on the major scale, especially the balancing out in the second level chakra, the masculine and feminine, we have added weight to the planet because the energy comes in and it gets stuck. It stops. Well, in this time of accelerated energy, the planet cannot sustain the weight of high levels of imbalance and all the energy coming in at the same time. So that creates what we call the propensity towards polar shifts and major earth changes on the planet, because in effect what any of the ancient prophecies, and consistent with what I'm getting, what they're all saying is that the earth is going to heal. See, that's not an if. The if is, are we going to heal with the earth, or are we going to be part of that which has to be purged? So the earth is real clear. All right? So now we have to do the work. And it doesn't say that everybody on the planet has to be there. It's the mighty few.
That's right.
You know? And it's an individual journey. You're not going to belong to the right church or the right group or the right anything. You were talking earlier, Daryl. It's an individual journey. And you've got to follow your calling. We did a retreat up in the Georgia mountains in the fall, September. And when the grandmothers came, what they said was, if you have received your calling, whatever it may be, and you're not about the work, shame on you. You know, that's about as clear as it gets. So this is why then the 12, what they call the 12-pointed hawk within, or the 12 points on the hawk within, must come into alignment. And as these points within our body, just as the points within the planet, come into alignment, we're at a point where we can ascend. Now let me talk about that in relationship to this. Going back to this drawing again. When I mention the energy coming into the planet being so strong, what is happening at the core, I'm going to shift back and forth between overheads. I'm trying to get as much in this hour as we possibly can. All right, hold that in your mind. Now, what is happening at the core of the earth is that the energy coming in is so strong and so accelerated that it is creating, if you were to think of this as the core as we know it, is creating an inner breaking away at the core. And this inner ball is extremely dense. In other words, it's very, very heavy, very full. And this inner core has started a rotation on an axis that's opposite than the Earth. Okay? Now, what happens here when that happens, there's a lot of friction that builds. And so there are openings now throughout the planet. These were the four primary, what they call vectors, or you may hear people refer to them as portals. What they are is tremendous release of energy coming off the core of the planet. Not even these are sufficient to deal with the energy that we're having now. So each of these vectors, these four are called parenting vectors. And they're parenting other vectors around the planet. So we really have more, I would say about 24 now that are very, very active. And when I say 24, I'm not talking about 24 points on the planet. I'm talking about lines of energy. Okay? Lines of energy. So on any one vector, there could be several continents or several cities and so forth. The impact of this opposite rotation of this very dense matter is that it is causing the Earth to slow down on its axis. And as the Earth is slowing down on its axis, and there was an article in Scientific America in October, November, and the article talked about the slowing down of the Earth, or one of the theories that the Earth is now slowing down on its axis. So it's always nice sometimes just to know that what you're getting is matching up with some of the things that are happening out there. The slowing down of the planet, and I don't have this on an overhead because it's one of the newer drawings. In fact, I was instructed at the last minute to put it in the book. Let's see if I can put my hand on it just so you can see what I'm talking about. Just think, I just want you to have a visual image of a cube. Okay? The slowing down of the Earth is allowing us to see the difference between thinking of the Earth or the inner core of the Earth as a circle and seeing a cube. Now, why is that important? Because, you know, we talk about the planet being round. Well, in the work that's coming through now in Now Time Prophecy, they call the Earth a spun cube. And when the cube is spun, with the gases and so forth that are on the planet, it appears to be a sphere or a circle. However, with the new energy, when the axis in the Earth, the shifting on the axis and the slowing down of the spin, what we're now able to begin to perceive are the edges of the cube. And why this is important is because as the Earth continues to slow down, if you think of a cube, it's two squares with the connecting lines that make up the cube. As it slows down, these openings are moving apart, the lines that connect the cube. And as those openings occur, what is happening for us is that we are now able to access higher levels of consciousness or higher dimensions so that we can almost know things before we know them. We can hear things before the word is said. We can manifest by thought. It's no longer a matter of putting the word out there. Be careful with what you think, because it can literally manifest. And I can share, I'll pause for a minute to share. I talked a little bit about being up in the mountains for 21 days, in silence for 21 days, and sort of a modified fast because I was in the elements. One of the things that happened, I learned very clearly that the gap between thought and manifestation is narrowing. I remember one night I'd had just lemon, honey, and water during the day, and then at night I'd have a soup where I'd boil a carrot or yam or something. And about 7 days in, I said, "Oh, I would love to have an apple." And that's just what came to me. Well, the next day, people would come and pray and be in silence during the time that I was there at the different altars and so forth. Well, everybody who came that next day brought fruit. And I literally had so much fruit, I had to give 4 bags of it away. And so, again, the thought, I want an apple. So I get not only apples, but all kinds of fruit. And then the most awesome experience for me in terms of learning the space between thought and actually experiencing how narrow that gap is, the very last night I was there, I didn't want to sleep in the teepee, so I took my stuff outside, and I was sleeping outside, and I looked up at the sky, and it was overcast. And I said, "God, I'd love for the stars to come out so I could thank them because they've been so beautiful." At night, when you look up into the trees, they look like ornaments on the trees because there wasn't a lot of light pollution or anything. And so as soon as I said it, the sky parted, And I think, Kurt, you were out that night, but you didn't know what was going on for me. The sky parted, and you could see the stars. And tears just came to me. And then once I said my thank yous and my prayers, it closed back up. And so, again, it was knowing. I knew that was my moment, because when you have an experience like that, it stays with you forever. And so no matter where you get shaky on your path, you can go back to that experience and it'll plug you in real fast. So with this opening of the gateways, or the separation of the cubes or the squares, again, what is happening? We're able to access higher and higher levels of consciousness, or higher and higher levels of higher dimensions. And what's important about that is that, you know, you've heard scientists talk about we only use about 12% of the brain. But in these higher levels of consciousness, we're moving to where we can access greater and greater degree of the brain power. But that doesn't necessarily come in the way that we're used to it coming. It may not come with us sitting down doing physics or higher level math or whatever. It comes in various ways of spiritual enlightenment, you know, knowingness, and being able to move in that knowingness. Sometimes things that aren't so easy to define and aren't necessarily comfortable for us all to, you know, to hold on to. But as we journey into the power of that. And what is really happening in that, as these gateways open, our conscious mind, the distance between our conscious mind and our subconscious knowing, which is in now time language where everything is everything. In other words, there's no past or present or future. It all is right now, and we can access any of that. And I'm looking for a particular... We can access any of that, and therefore we may appear to be quite brilliant, but what it is at a conscious level, we're now able to recall information that before was hidden or deep. And one way to think about that, how many of you have heard of Edgar Cayce, the clairvoyant? One of the theories behind clairvoyance and being able to do what they do is that they're able to bring into consciousness the subconscious. Now, in now time reference, it looks like this. This is what's called the blueprint of consciousness. And what that means is that no matter where you go in this sphere, no matter where you are, all points intersect, all knowing. And the point of exchange in here is here at this level. Again, going reference back to the second level chakra, which they call the point of exchange. We breathe in from the universe, or we bring into our bodies, into our conscious realm, what's in the universe. Inside of us, it's stamped with the essence of who we are. And when we breathe out, all of that goes back out into the universe, so that in effect, in breath, there is no separation of life. Now, I want everybody to be very careful when we talk about the year 2000, and there's this big thing about 2000 and the new millennium. Well, in now time reference, we need to let that go, because it's not even the year 2000. You know, 2000 was a new calendar that was created after the birth, or really long after Christ died, and we sort of separated time by the BC and the AD and that sort of thing. So this isn't the year 2000. What happened on December 21st is we moved from the 24th age of the planet, each age being 312,000 years, and I'm going to tie it back to that, so just hang in there with me, into the 25th age of the planet, which is the age of spiritual enlightenment. Now, it's important for us to remember back to the original breath. Because as we train ourselves to go beyond this artificial separation of time, so that we see all time as one stream, then we can begin to bring forward into consciousness all that ever was, and all that ever is, and all that ever will be, because we are connected back to the original breath. And this is, I don't have an overhead for this, I'll just show it just so that you can get a visual, because in relationship to this consciousness, the 25 ages of the planet, I don't know what that was, maybe it was a confirmation of some or something. In the ages of the planet, Remember I talked about all of the drawings, not only talking about the planet. And let me hold up for 1 second. If this is humankind, and this is a blueprint of consciousness, that means that this symbolically represents our link to everything that is. And in now time reference, it says everything that is, whether we're talking organic or inorganic, life or a rock. All right? That there is no separation. This is in everything, in every cell, in every molecule. This, as we look at, I guess you can just load it around, because I want to make this point. I'm trying to tie what we talked about before into where it's going in the new reference. In this, there's an interval that repeats itself. It keeps doubling. And I think it's the numbers 4, 5, 9, 3, 3, 3. Is that right? Right. And when you see this, it'll make sense. And what it does is it shows the DNA strand and the points at which the strands cross. Now, the points in which the strands cross and in relationship to the age of the planet are the same. Again, the mirror of the planet and the human being. So what is really the undertone is here, it's so important for us to release any thought, any reference in our minds to separation of anything. There's nothing in this room that we are separate from. There is no place that your feet can land that you are separate from. There is no time that you are separate from anything that has happened on this planet. And in that context, then, we begin to understand, as we think of ourselves that far back to the original breath, right, that far back, then we begin to have a knowingness about us that transcends anything that we're taught. That's where the miracle territory is. That's where we can create. That's out of which we can manifest, because we know. So let me stop here for a minute, because I know it's been like, and see if there are any questions up to that point, and then we'll move forward to some additional new information.
Well, that's still the phase that this phrase that as above, so below.
Mm-hmm. Absolutely. One of the drawings that came through, and I don't have that, a lot of stuff is coming so fast now, is a drawing of two spheres. And I believe, and I had a glimpse of it in this work, that what we're talking about are two parallel planets. Remember the cube when I talked about it pulling apart? When I don't know if it's just on a spiritual, energetic level, or if it's going to be an actual physical occurrence. And that is that as these two pull apart, we're looking at two separate spheres. And in the middle was a triangle. The triangle was pointing as above, pointing up to one. So below, pointing down to the bottom one. And in the middle was the dolphin. There was a dolphin in the middle. And what I was told is that the dolphin is the messenger between the worlds. Okay? And so I'm trying to put that all in context, Gladys. So as above, so below means that within the now time reference, or within that reference, is that as this separation is occurring, and we move into the as above, so below space, or the double triangle space, then we have both, the best of both worlds reside in us. It also has to do with the drawing, another new drawing that came about that looks at where we are right now between the two ages. Age 24, which was the emergence of the physical, where we perfected the physical form. And the 25th age, which is the age of spiritual enlightenment, where we're moving into the enlightenment of the spiritual, the as above, so below, the two different worlds, or the parallel worlds. As we move into that space, we have to understand that right now is kind of an uncomfortable time, and I say that kind of lightly because it can be very intense. It's a time of great transformation, but it can also be very intense because we're still walking in both. And it takes us a while consciously, it takes us a while as a society to begin to understand what that means, because a lot of systems just aren't going to work the way they have in the past. You know, it's no wonder that Y2K is happening at this time. Now, with this energy that I talked about coming into the planet on December 21st, one of the things that I was told is that, well, let me back up and say what my experience was. There were 2 days while I was on the mountain when I went into a very deep sleep. In fact, I didn't wake up for the 2 days at all. And what happened, this was the beginning of the third week, I think, of the experience. The first week was a piece of cake. It was 75 degrees up in the mountains. It was gorgeous. And then the second week came, and I call that my hell week, because the temperatures never got above 30. We had a lot of rain, which meant everything in the teepee had to come out of the teepee. It was a very physically exhausting week, and being by myself there during the week, keeping a fire going the whole time, and everything basically that you have to do to survive. By the end of that second week, I was really depleted. And I got to the point where I think it was 2 days towards the end of that, I didn't eat, I didn't drink, I just really lost any desire to sustain myself physically because I was exhausted. And so I remember going to bed that night and saying, I really need help, you know. And the next morning, 2 people came, Rabia and David came down, and they told me then that they weren't leaving until it was over. So for the last week, I had 2 people there helping. So when David came, because he came first, there was a conversation between he and myself that I was sort of present for and not. I felt like it was more the council speaking through me to him. And he said after they finished, basically what happened, I was gone. So for his experience was that for 2 days, it was basically just making sure the wood was kept in the fire and that sort of thing. My experience of it was I felt myself drifting away into this light. And when I got into the light, I went someplace, and a lot of information was just being poured into me. But the light was so intense, and it had a very violet color and some silver and gold threads in it, but it was very, very intense. And it was so beautiful, I didn't want to come back. And somewhere just before I came back, I felt this explosion. I mean, physically I felt it, and all levels of knowing I felt it. And it felt like it came right out of my chest. And so I asked David later, I said, did you notice anything happening? You know, I didn't tell him what my experience was. I said, did you notice anything unusual that happened to my body? And he said there was one point where you sat up and threw your arms up and you just went back down. So I'm sure that was at that point. And it was just so intense, but there was so much knowledge that occurred at that point. And so what happened after that was that I was told that this energy coming into the planet, and I'm struggling now because I wanted to make a point of it before I moved here, has the capacity to transform everything. And I talked about that before. But the important piece I wanted to bring into this was that I was also told while I was in the light that there is an opposition to the spiritual age. And right now, while we're in the transition points between the 25th and the 24th and 25th age, this opposing energy is led by a configuration where Mars is the central celestial ruling energy. And it's a very warring energy. It's a very, I really believe that anything that I'm channeling and anybody else is receiving, all of that, because they have access to some of the best and brightest in terms of people who are bringing in information. And Sven, I think was the one a long time ago, before I even realized the significance of it, brought it to my attention about the amount of money that's being done in the research into extraterrestrial, ESP and extrasensory perception, and all. So they know this information. So I find it very interesting that where they're choosing to position themselves right now is right along that channel. And also the whole Y2K thing. I'm sorry, I don't believe it is what we're being told it is. I mean, you think about it, a world ruled by computers and numbers, it's a perfect opportunity to realign. So again, understanding how that energy coming from Mars is manifesting. But in the now time prophecies, the mothers, the grandmothers keep saying, don't worry about it, no matter what it looks like, we've got it in check. So I know there's going to be some major reckoning that is going to come. Because when the earth changes escalate, and I don't say when they begin because they've already begun, we're not being given the information. When Papua New Guinea had the wave that came, do you all remember that, the tidal wave? Killed all those people? It wiped out an entire generation of young people. The schools didn't open the next day because there were no more kids on the island. Think about it. When that tidal wave came 10 days before, because we went through and got the seismographic data to plot it, because it was what was happening by this point. Every place there had been a natural disaster, we found that it was within 10 miles or so of the plots on the map. So when we got to Papua New Guinea, we pulled up all the seismographic information in that area and found out there had been 10 earthquakes in Papua New Guinea that week alone. Over 5.6 on the Richter scale. It doesn't take a genius to figure out something was getting ready to happen. Now, when you look at Nicaragua and Honduras, you see the same thing happen. The majority of the deaths there were who? Children. You know? So it's very interesting that these young spirits are coming in here to try to help awaken us. But you have to understand the media is not going to give it to us. It's couched in their own language. So we have to really begin to look at what's happening and understand. We're in the middle of it. That's why it's called now time. It's not the great millennium. It's now. The energy from December 21st, we're here. We moved into the 25th age. And we have a very strong opposing energy in this first quarter of this year where anything could happen. There's going to be a lot of volatility. So anyway, yes.
I've been reading a lot about the HAARP, the hard weather control. And according to that, they are doing these low frequency waves, and they say they're supposed to confuse the enemy in case of a war, but they are messing with the earth because you know they had those 21 inches of snow in the Arizona desert, and all the fruit crop in Los Angeles has been destroyed now because of the 25-degree weather. But it also saying it's affecting the memory of the earth, and she's opening up new grids from the old grids, and she's getting new grids now because of this. And like you said, they know everything, and they're actually experimenting with this, and it's affecting us too.
Right. I think again, the mother is going to prevail because she's going to heal.
We know that, but I'm just saying that there's the opposition of Mars.
Right. There's a lot of manipulation going on in the atmosphere. A lot of things happening with the food supply in terms of what's being given to us. A lot of things on all different kinds of levels.
5% of the food that's in there is genetically engineered.
And it's important. I know that the Native American elders out of the Hopi elders, I was at a World Indigenous Conference, and they were saying when they originally talked about storing up food, they say we should begin to store enough food and water to sustain ourselves for 2 years. But when we went back to the conference, went to the conference this time, they were saying 7 years.
Whoa.
Yeah.
Question. You mentioned Lake Nasser and that area being where the bulge or the top of the world is. Is that the artificial lake
Yes.
or Aswan Dam
Yes.
area?
Yes.
Which was basically, that was a created thing.
Right. It's a man-made lake.
It's a man-made lake. Now, I'm under the understanding that there is a bunch of stuff on the bottom of that lake. Pyramids.
It's all kinds of stuff.
All kinds of stuff.
The whole Nubian civilization, the artifacts of that are under that. And
because that was where Egyptian civilization started in Nubia and flowed up, down the Nile, however you want to look at that direction.
Right.
Okay.
Absolutely.
Just wanted to be sure.
Did everybody understand what he was saying, the statement there? Lake Nasser, which is where following the longitudinal and latitudinal plots, it puts the energy coming into the earth, the first entrance and the channel of that energy. Oh, okay. The channel of that energy is at Lake Nasser. That's the entrance point to the core. Now, I'm glad you mentioned that, because I believe, in now time reference, I'm always told, go return to the teachings of the ancient ones, that the way through this period is through the knowledge of the ancient ones. Just in that information alone, I was always fascinated about the fact that the Olmec heads were off of Peru down there and all in that area. Yeah. And then when I started getting this information, you know what I realized? We traveled this channel. And that was a ritual. That was ceremony. That traversing the channel. Now, what I'm saying by that is that the Olmec heads are African carved heads with cornrows carved in stone that are taller than this room.
That's how they when they'll shut it back.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm. And in fact, it was Gaynell and Wayne Chandler who went down and found the photographs of the cornrows. And then Van Sertima put that picture in their book, because then it was like definitive. Okay? What I don't know in terms of ritual and ceremony, and I'm hoping that I'll gain more and more clarity on this, is whether they traveled the physical path or whether it was I believe there is an internal channel where you can really access that channel, and then in that accessing that channel, you move beyond the realms of what we're used to, where you move into that where time and space have no reference. So there could have been instantaneous travel along those channels given the right time. So I wanted to make that point because I'm really fascinated by that possibility now. The other piece that I was told is that every 100 years there are 12 symbolically perfect beings that are sent forth on the planet. 12 every 100 years. Now the clock for organic life is, 7 billion years? Kurt, when we're doing the math on some estimate?
Sure.
Yeah. To the point where the breath came onto the planet. Yeah. So if you look at the evolution of when we came on board, and I don't have a good fix on that yet. That information is so new because I'm learning about the whole one cell to when the cells began to split and how we came to where we are now, which ultimately we're leading towards this perfect being, not just a physical body, but a spirit body as well. So every 100 years, that's a lot of people. That's a lot of people. It's a lot of Jesuses and Buddhas and Krishnas and so forth. It's a lot of people. And I figured that since we never hear anything about women, that must be where we all are. So.
One other question I'd like for you to comment on in regards to DNA.
Yes.
I've been reading a book recently by someone that is basically tying together what they call the cosmic serpent of all of the ancient civilizations. Yeah. Cosmic serpent and DNA and the origin of knowledge. And the information in that basically is saying that all of these ancient cultures had and acquired their knowledge directly from the source. Right. In other words, from the DNA, and that cosmic serpent that we find in Egypt and the South American civilizations and just about any ancient civilization that you can find, there is that serpent which is dual in nature, just like the DNA. It intertwines, it moves like the serpent. And I just wanted you to correlate that or speak on that in regards.
Yeah, thank you, because that brings me, I wanted to make another point about the DNA piece. The Cosmic Serpent is a very interesting book. It's a very easy to read book in a way. And it does. It talks about the symbol of the serpent through all time and where it appears. And it appears in everything. Everything. Any recorded whether it's in the pictures or words, the serpent comes forward. And the serpent then is the symbolic of the DNA ladder, or the DNA. That picture that I showed you with the lines going around like that, the twin serpent. In now time, the most significant thing I think I've gotten on DNA, and I'm not sure where it fits with that, and you might have a sense of it. When I was taken into the light, as I was riding back, what I saw was I talked about this violet ray, but it was more than just a ray. It was almost like a huge crystal, violet crystal, extended from the heavens out of that 7-point alignment. And what I was told is that our DNA, we have only used up some of the space of the language of the DNA. In other words, the language of the DNA is what makes you human and have the characteristics you have, what makes a cat, a cat, or a tree, that only a very few of the coding language has even been used up yet. In other words, there's almost like infinite possibility of creation, or I think maybe diversity of expression. In now time, with the violet ray, what I was told is that this right here represents the second seeding of the planet. And the second seeding of the planet, the crystal from the heavens, the violet ray, is matching up to the crystalline formation of the DNA. And it's the crystalline formation of the DNA that affects the languaging. And in that, then, we come to this point, that this energy that's coming in is not only affecting us on this etheric level or spiritual level or energy level, it's affecting a definite molecular transformation or transmutation, because we're being recoded right now. That's right. It really is. I mean, it is a party. It is that kind of energy. We're being recoded. Now, I was shown this. I didn't understand that until coming off the mountains, because this came a while back. And Kirk and I, we spent a lot of time trying to figure out, because I don't know if you all know Dr. Lycurgus Muldrow, but he is actually, his experience and background is in genetic engineering. And so he was the one who told me that this looks as though it has something to do with the beta chain and some change that's occurring in the protein in our... Come on, work with me.
Proteins.
Okay, proteins. Now, the reason why this becomes significant is that in this new energy that's coming into the planet, they call it the shield of life is being lifted. My interpretation of that is the ozone layer is going to disappear, and it has nothing to do with anything that we're doing. This is a natural progression. And as the ozone is lifted, that's what gives, the ozone kept us encapsulated, just as, well, I don't want to go into another aspect of the prophecies, but when I talk about the 8-pointed cube and the jackal when I was here before. Okay, the ozone layer is like a energy shield around the planet that really protected us so that life could proceed to the point of the perfection of the physical, of form. But now, in this higher dimension and higher level of consciousness, as we move and access these gateways, that shield has to be lifted because it no longer serves any kind of purpose. It's done its work. It's like the embryo breaking out of the little baby chicken breaking out of the egg. As that happens, we then are receiving all sorts of energy from the universe. And our bodies, the way they are right now, could not handle it. If that were to be gone tomorrow, we would all be dead within a relatively short period of time. That much exposure. So there has to be a molecular change or DNA reprogramming of the physical form. Now, we may look the same, but we'll be able to live under the very different conditions. And so that I wanted to make that point with the DNA. But the main thing that I found fascinating was the crystalline formation in the heavens affecting the crystalline formation or the base formation of DNA, which is really where the language is coded. So did I end? Okay.
Yeah, I just wanted you to just expound on it.
Right. I even have some drawings from when I was in the mountains of the two halves of the brain, that in this transformation, in this evolution, it's really evolution, the space that, you have the two halves of the brain and you have the space in between. You are familiar with what a brain looks like? In this configuration, instead of that space being in the middle, it looks like the strands kind of go out like this. Again, the serpent, kind of concept. But the halves of the brain are forming more of a whole unit rather than two independent pieces. Yeah. Any other questions?
It's a little off the point, but in now time, is there anything about a civilization inside of the Earth?
Well, that takes us back to what I was talking about. I don't know about a civilization in there, but I know. No, let me change that. There is something in there. Okay, and I believe that this channel of energy that takes us into the core, that as we learn and can access that channel, that there are, I think the energy there is a major source of energy that can help us transcend ourselves. And that's why I believe the pilgrimage occurred. And that's why I was saying I don't think they traveled a physical route so much as they traveled the outer, what would appear the outer route, as they traveled into the core. And my understanding, but this is really more from a sense of what I'm receiving in some of the drawings, is that as in my own experience of going through the core and coming out in the universe, is that there's a point at which you go through the core. And I believe, again, you've got the two aspects of the square, or the cube. Right. And some space in between these two squares that are joined, there is a gateway to the universe. So that not only is it a channel through the earth, it's also a channel out into the universe. So my answer to your question is there is something happening there, and there is definite energy there. And I have not been able to access it and sustain it long enough yet to get a sense of it. But I know, I would bet my life on it almost that the answer to your question would be that it's not necessarily a life force living there, but it's an open gateway. And a lot of paths are crossed in that space.
Would you say that it would be similar to that mirror there that would reflect through the dimensional world the possibilities of the life forms that exist on the dimensional world, or the dimensional level?
Okay, ask me that one more time.
Okay, would you say that these life forms, that there's a window to the dimensional world, and that these life forms that she's speaking of actually live on that dimensional level?
Well, yes. I mean, I think that in one sense my answer to your question would be yes, because you can only access those points when you're ready.
That's right. And when you go there, you'll see them.
Exactly.
That's right.
And that's why the molecular changes are occurring, and that's why we have to do the work inside.
Sure.
And it's not about thinking about doing it. It's about really committing ourselves, because one of the things I was told on the mountain for my own personal use was that I had evolved spiritually to where I could deal with all the information, but my vessel could not deal with where I was. So if I was going to continue to do the work, then I had to make whatever necessary changes there were to shore up the vessel. And that meant in terms of my eating patterns, again, going back to what's in the book, and it's very clear. If you squeeze it and nothing comes out, don't eat it. Now, I can't say I've gotten there, but I'm working towards it. I think I'm a lot further along, having had that opportunity to be in an environment for 21 days where I had to change things. And also the water, a gallon of water a day. Yeah. Because our fluidity should always parallel, our basic physiology should parallel that of the earth. And right now here we are, it's January, and it's like springtime. Okay, so anyway, so in that space, go ahead.
One more question. But when you do reach this level, in all the societies they teach this, that there is no limitation.
Absolutely.
As long as there's no desire.
And that goes back to the surrender.
That's it.
I didn't understand until I had to go through that.
Right.
Being stripped away to surrender to gain that insight in terms of being able to personally understand it. We talked a lot the last time I was here about unconditional love. Let me just go to, you had a question. Let's do that last
Yes,
time.
are you familiar with Buddhist monk book, The Hermit? It's very deep. It's in a Tibetan monk, and he wrote, he has one book, too, that I would recommend, The Third Eye in the Hermit. And it's not telling you the third eye, but when he was 7 years old in Tibet, they do this astrological readings, and they come to get him and told him that he was going to be a surgeon. So they had to put the thing in and open up his third eye. And the surgeon that he was going to be able to see the people's auras. And then when he was 16, he had to go into this cave where this hermit had been after 60 years, and he was blind. But if you didn't believe in extraterrestrials, when you get the reading this about the hermit, he tells what you were talking about. The Earth was 7 billion years old. They had to put the giant ferns because of the phosphorus and all the carbon monoxide, and the plants had to eat it that many years. And then Earth had to be stabilized enough for the dinosaurs. And then another 7 billion years went by, and then because of the gases and things, until those plants were eating them up and making it stable. And they said these people are called the gardeners, and they plant people on the earth. So they come in all from 18 inches up to 30 feet.
Interesting. That's called the Hermit?
It's L-O-V-S-A-N-G. Rapper, and he has written 12 books, but the two I find the best were The Hermit and The Third Eye.
Okay, thank you, Clarence.
What you just said just kind of triggered something, an image in my mind, because I was reading this book that we're talking about that life, as it began on this planet, instead of evolving out of some cosmic soup and all this other stuff, that it kind of appeared all at once. And they talk about that DNA, when we're talking about DNA, that it's the most stable thing that has ever existed on this planet. There is that, it basically has existed unchanged from the very beginning, and that DNA, which consists of basically an alphabet, if you want to call it,
it's like computer language
4 letters, and the way that they combine in whatever sequence that they do to create what we see as each other and all life, for that matter, on the planet, that each of us is walking around with basically 125 billion miles of DNA in each of our bodies, and that it's about 10 atoms wide, and just the enormity of that, and that DNA, that thing has existed unchanged. No rock, nothing has existed in as stable a condition, for that long time.
And then I'm glad you mentioned the rock, because it's important when I talked about us understanding our lineage that goes back to the beginning of breath. It actually even goes back further than that, because into the basic elements of the earth itself. I just wanted to make sure that was said. I wanted to say one thing about unconditional love before we moved on. I talked the last time about the importance of unconditional love, about us doing the work to come into unconditional love of ourselves. Let's not worry about anybody else out there right now for a second. Let's just begin to do the work on ourselves. Thank you. And as we do that, as we're able to clear that passageway, and that means sometimes you got to go in and deal with stuff you really don't want to deal with. All right? Stuff that hurts, all the judgment stuff. You got to go through it to let it all go. Okay? And that's more important now than ever. If we don't do anything else but that in itself will allow us to access higher points. And the other thing is to remember, in our culture, we tend to think it's more important to take care of everybody else than ourselves. And we have this notion that we can love everybody else, but, we don't think about what loving ourselves means. Well, one of the things that with the now time reference now, that this dialogue with myself, when someone tells me they love me, then I want to know, what does that look like? What does it feel like? And how is that mirrored in how you treat yourself? Because when you come into that space, you emit love. And anybody walking across your path is affected by that. So you then achieve the outer by doing the inner, but you can't do the inner by trying to do the outer, because if you're focused out there, you don't even know what it is.
That's right.
It's like everybody looking for God up there and God is in you.
Absolutely.
So in speaking of unconditional love, you were talking about balancing that second level chakra. Are you going to address that, or can we address that now?
I'll do a quick, I promise we'd be out by 8, but, or I guess that is what we're...
By 9.
About 5 more minutes?
By
Okay.
9. You said by 9.
He's shaking his head. No, I did not say that. Trying to think of a quick way to just to get the information across. When I talked about the second level being where the work has to be done, all right, there's no quick way. We'll go as far as we can, and then we get thrown out.
That's good.
Oh, all right, let's go here then.
Goodness. Take your time.
All right.
Yes.
In now time reference, remember I sent around the drawing of the ages and talked about each age being 312,000 years. This complete circle represents an age. Each age has a prevailing energy. So this, nature has a way of ordering everything for us. So we go from a masculine to a feminine, masculine, feminine, and so forth. Well, in the age of the planet, the 4 seasons around, each season being 26,000 years, we followed the masculine, feminine, as we went through these phases. Coming through the next 4 seasons, we maintained our sequence, but as we came back around and entered into the 12th season, all right, the end of an age, which is what we've just come through, the end of an age, the masculine did not give way to the feminine. So we went into a season out of balance. And before we exit the season, which remember I talked about right now, being in the space between the two, the 24th and 25th age, before we exit the season, the feminine must regain the season. Now, let's not think of this, sometimes people get hung up on it in terms of the man-woman kind of thing. That's not what I'm talking about, although it does play out that way. I'm talking about energy. Masculine energy being doer energy, feminine energy being receiver energy. The times right now with all the energy coming forward onto the planet is a time to be in what? Receivership. And that's why when we talk about the opposing energy led by Mars, this opposing energy is trying to hold on to this control, because it was that same configuration that led us into this season. Right? So it's trying to hold on there. Now, how that plays out here on the second level chakra. In the mythology of now time that talks about the union of the sun and the moon and the birthing of Mother Earth, when we went out of balance, the core of the earth, which is symbolic of the heart of the mother, was encased in an 8-pointed cube. Now, isn't it interesting now that cube is opening? Okay? It was placed in this 8-pointed cube, and around the cube was the jackal, or the masculine energy. And the purpose of the jackal wasn't to protect what was in here. The purpose of the jackal was to prevent the knowledge of the feminine from coming forward, so that we could maintain this imbalance, so that the doer energy could prevail. Now, unchecked by the feminine, what that has led us to is to a point where, as human beings, the thought prevails that we, and I use that term, I don't know if I really want to say we, but nevertheless, where we can co-create with God. Now, I'm not talking about the co-creation that comes out of us understanding our divinity from within. I'm talking about where we can manipulate the elements, the chemicals, physiology, and everything else, and duplicate and clone life. And in that, that's like the ultimate of the imbalance. Now, in the masculine and feminine, this space right here on the now time drawings is here, the second level chakra. And we have the same battle going on between the masculine and feminine. Now here, when this was encased, they call that the mother has been raped so much that now that's why we're at a point where she has to heal or destruct. And that's why they say the mother will heal, the planet will heal. Well, within us, as these gateways, these cubes are pulling apart in this awakening, this is starting to break down. Jackal's not being effective anymore. It can't contain the feminine. The feminine is really escalating. Not just the feminine that's expressed through women, but even the feminine that's expressed through men. And men, I really, if you're a real man, then get with that feminine side. Understand that receivership that has to balance out the doer energy. So as this process, if this is breaking away, then within the womb space, now let's think about the second chakra level area in terms of now time reference, why this is so important. This is the point of exchange with the universe. This is where the soul, that light body out there, that light being out there that makes their journey onto the earth, this is where they choose to come into physical form and be nurtured and protected to the place where they're ready to come out and to be into the world. So this is one of the most sacred spaces in the body. It is the point of exchange with the universe. And so it's very important, and if you notice, in the women have a lot of trouble in this area.
Yep.
Okay. I thought it was interesting that at the time I was gaining really clear information about what was happening here, that the whole issue with Clinton came forward. Because it really brings up all the stuff that we have attached to the whole issue around sexuality. That's like a word we don't bring up in discussions or workshops. But a lot of stuff hinges on it. We've got to bring it up. It's got to come out. Because we got to move beyond that.
Right.
And as long as we keep it under the surface, in Now Time, when the mythology of Now Time came forward in doing trans work with Kurt, one of the things that was said is that women bear witness to what happened to the mother. That our experience brings us very close to the experiences of the raping of the mother. And that we bear that. So there's a lot of cleaning up and clearing up to do, and that's part of that unconditional love piece that allows us to move into a balance at this level. And again, in Now Time, that is the most significant work on the chakras that needs to happen. I forgot the question, so I don't know if I answered it.
What's the work we have to do? Can you start to show us things or exercises?
At this level?
Unconditional.
Yeah. It's so full. It's not one thing that we can do. It has a combination of the eating right. It has a combination of living right. In other words, one important piece in all of this is living our truth. Often in our society, especially in our culture here, we're taught to live how everybody else perceives us that we should live and we should be. And so then as young children, that knowingness about who we are and what we've come here to do, and that love for that doing begins to get packed under and under, heavier and heavier levels of the expectation of everybody around us. And then we get caught in that cycle. And so we're so busy trying to make things okay that we get lost in it. And in getting lost in it, then we're trying to not only make everything okay in terms of how people are perceiving us, then we start guarding everybody else around us from certain information because we don't want their feelings to get hurt. So what we've done then is not only impede our own growth into our whole divine essence, we're not allowing the people around us to be in their true divine selves. So that's another area, living our truth. And you'll be surprised. At first, it's kind of like learning how to skate. You fall down, you get up. You fall down, you get up. Even the eating, you fall down, you get up. You just keep getting up again. The other is prayer and meditation. You have to find the time. And Now Time says as things are accelerating, we must slow down. And that seems to be And when you're in the middle of it, it doesn't seem to be what it is you should be doing. When you're in the middle of the chaos, you think you've got to dig in deeper and work harder. Okay? But you got to trust, you got to have faith, you got to let go and slow down. And it's amazing that in that process of slowing down and letting go, the answers just come. And they're far more advanced than what we could have spent all day sitting there trying to work to come up with. Okay? The other is, there are actually 10 imperatives in the back of the book that have to do with all of that. But the other is learning how to live in the infinite moment. We spend a lot of our time, worrying about everything that's ever happened in the past and all our dreams and visions of the future. And we lose sight of this moment right now, because it's the only thing that determines your future is what you're doing with this moment right now. All possibility exists in the moment. And if you want to create for yourself the life that you want, just ask yourself, what am I doing right now that's going to affect where I am, where I want to be? But see, what we do is, we're just dreaming, or we're worrying. We're saying, I wish I should have, could have, didn't have, all of that. And we lose sight of this moment. So that's the other thing, learning to be in the infinite moment. That was one of the major teachings that I had on the mountain. Because when you've got 24 hours, 21 days, you have a lot of time to be in the infinite moment. And I was in that situation long enough until I finally got it and understood. So anyway, there are 10 imperatives in the back of the book. And the books are 20. So it's everything. It's whatever calls to you. Some people are into yoga. Some people are into Tai Chi. It really is what calls to you. But you have to be about the work. That's the main, taking the action. It's not just enough to know. If you know when you're not doing anything, you're just as bad as anybody else out there that's not even on the path. You've got to take the action. And with this energy, the other thing I might add, part of what feels uncomfortable is that it's harder and harder for us to compromise our purpose. It really gets really hard. And when you don't do what you know you should be doing, it's hard to be in that space. Any other questions? Comments?